Human types, corpus. The best way to describe the psychosis-hylomorphism or energy type identified as corpus would be as a partiality or bias towards stable endurance and loyal protection. Of course, this sounds somewhat vague and universal, so it is important to understand that bias towards endurance and protection means that it often comes at the expense of pretty much everything else. We have returned to a type in the morum sphere, and if excidium can be described as primitive and raw, and meritum as sophisticated and hardworking, then corpus is somewhere in between, more primitive and simple than meritum, but also more orderly and hardworking than excidium. An energy focused on community, safety, stability, crafts, and functionality. Rather than being a violent outlaw or an ambitious elitist, corpus is more of a loyal subject, devoted to king, country, and community. Very protective and concerned with the well-being of their children, family, and neighbors, and can be regarded as the mother or farmer archetype. They will endure and sacrifice for the sake of others, and tends to be responsible partners or parents. The orientation towards endurance and duty leads to a tendency to become very stoic and even unselfish. Corpus means body, structure, or community, and refers to support, stability, and conservative customs. The least intense and the most rock-solid energy type. An alternative name for the instinct is stabilum, which means steadfast or enduring.
Whether that be in automobile maintenance and mechanics, whether it be in steel sculpting or in painting or one of the other arts, carpentry, a trade, something that has a mechanical skill to it, something that has a creative thrust to it. When you build a house, you look at a house and say, I helped build that. That's a great feeling.
Looking at its position on the conceptual map, the tool we employ to make it easier to remember the context, relation, and nature of these character phenomena, we see that corpus is located in the morum sphere in the middle motion column. Since the lower sphere of morum represents minus and still dominates in this energy, corpus, being minus motion, can thus be said to be the reflection of the middle sphere in the lower sphere. So just as with libidinum, this is a mixture of morum and gratum, or, if you prefer, of excidium and urbanum. However, since corpus is located in the morum sphere and is primarily a morum type, it is closer to excidium than to urbanum and can be considered a modified excidium. Part of the desensitized rawness of excidium gets transformed in corpus into enduring what's necessary to support and protect the family, the community, and the country. Similar to libidinum, there is also a lack of self-awareness, not really contemplating things, and also a carelessness or seeming disregard to themselves, similar to excidium, that can make them prone to accidents. Unlike libidinum, however, they don't care much for standing out or wearing fancy clothes. They often don't care much for their appearance and can come across as tasteless, not even trying to be discreet with patches, sticking plasters, and similar things. Their focus is mainly on others, not on themselves, similar to the mother who keeps making sure the children are fed before eating anything herself, and will keep asking family members if they are hungry. This is the type of parent or mother that teenagers are usually embarrassed about or frustrated with, because they have no subtlety, sophistication, or style. They also tend to lack depth and are not very sympathetic to neurotic problems. They are good providers when it comes to the physical dimension, but not so much when it comes to emotional, intellectual, or spiritual dimensions. With the mother archetype being a good symbol, I include corpus among the so-called feminine types, even though corpus is not necessarily more common among women, and as in the case with libidinum, the men don't come across as feminine, but rather as the strong, silent type. But corpus individuals tend to have a pear-shaped body, and this shape seems to increase the wide hips in women of other types that have corpus secondary. Although mainly a desensitized Morem type, the influence from the social anxious Kratom sphere makes them very focused on safety and stability, to the point of being prejudiced towards things that are new and unusual, as well as often being pedantic when it comes to crafts and maintaining a clean house or garden. The internal sensitivity or anxiousness behind this stoic rigidity also shows itself in a soft-hearted tendency that is easy to grieve or to shock, and being hurt by criticism. In fact, it is likely that the stoic rigidity of Corpus types, especially in the company of strangers, is a way to defend themselves against things that would disturb them. Because Corpus is quite possibly the most easily disturbed type, to the point that I have sometimes referred to them as being weak-hearted or sissy-minded, having a weak and feeble psychology, to the point that they often don't want to be aware of things, and use various things to tune out or distract themselves. And this can make them very boring, even though they are loyal, trustworthy and supportive. This is important to remember, since it explains why those types who have Corpus in their configuration tends to be more sensitive, anxious and squeamish. So although Corpus types tend to be stoic and enduring, other types that have Corpus secondary may actually become less stoic and more focused on problems, and misidentify their inner Corpus for misericordia or some other energy. That does not mean that there doesn't exist interesting or funny Corpus types. More and more I find comedians who are Corpus, such as Jimmy Dore and Pat Condell.
Well, who would have thought that my new video about censorship on YouTube would be censored by YouTube, whose employees now seem to be operating on the same hysterical level as book burners.
That's kind of ironic, right? Americans were a bunch of capitalists borrowing money from a bunch of communists so we can bring democracy to a bunch of Muslims who don't even fucking want it.
There has also been some famous actors, such as Harrison Ford, Mark Singer, and Richard Dean Anderson. As a Morem type, they are often drawn to sports and physical outdoor activity. Corpus individuals have a realistic sense of economics and can be good at math and run successful businesses. Although often conservative, since they value hard work and traditional customs, they are also often drawn to socialistic or communistic ideas of sharing and being of service to others.
How did the American standard of living keep going up over the last 30 years when the wages didn't? We borrowed, just like them. But you know, after a while, if your wages are flat, and the only way you can increase your standard of living is by borrowing, you don't need rocket science to understand eventually you'll have a level of debt you can't support on a flat wage. The American working class discovered that, which is why we're in a crisis now. The 1% takes it all, the 99% can't buy anything, and the 1% discover if the 99% can't buy anything, we're shafted. We need them. We need them to buy all this crap.
Since they usually earn people's trust by being loyal, hardworking, and undemanding, they are often rewarded with high positions in society, such as captains, executives, army generals, or statesmen. Angela Merkel, leader of Germany and the EU, for example, is a Corpus type. George Washington, the first president of the US, is another example. Winston Churchill likely had misericordia and magnitudinum in his configuration, which makes for a more intense version that can resemble excidium or magnitudinum. With urbanum in their configuration, they can be confused with urbanum types, and will probably not identify with the farmer archetype, which is more the result of libidinum, since libidinum adds desensitization and a desire for freedom, and the farmer type is a bit more independent and stubborn. Abstractum adds to the simplicity and lack of passion. Magnitudinum adds to the prejudice and perhaps making fun of things, while fiducium sometimes gives them a visionary quality when it comes to ideas and crafts.
I had seen science fiction movies before, but I'd always thought to myself, not enough characterization, not enough motivation. Perhaps I could use this as an excuse to go to those far-off planets with little polka-dotted people if necessary, and be able to talk about love, war, nature, God, sex, all those things that go to make up the excitement of the human condition. And maybe the TV censors would let it pass because it all seems so make-believe. So instead of a space western, I delivered a very different kind of story.
The spiritual problem for Corpus is a psychological superficiality and disconnection from themselves, as well as a desensitized loyalty that can easily be exploited by other people or cause damage by keeping a dysfunctional system going through habitual duty and fear of change. The spiritual strength is being down to earth and a solid pillar in their community, being the most useful on the practical level, and often appreciated by children and people in physical need.